It's been a while, and I have some free time because my mother-in-law took my daughter for the day, well, overnight. So my son is sleeping with my wife, and I am awake, and I have time. So, as I mentioned in the previous video, I have a Twitter. This is it, Strovil's Twitter, and I have been doing a lot on here lately. Starting back in end of November, beginning of December, I started to come up with an idea that I have been building for quite well since then, for the last 4 or 5 months, and that is the Giants versus Dragons game. It came from the giant people in Bermver, and if you go back to my previous video about dragon people, the dragon people. All those ideas just kind of smashed together in my brain, and I had this idea, and I went through a bunch of different ideas, literally because it's been over the course of several months. A lot of this information is kind of stream of consciousness, lots of different variants of things, just ideas being jotted down, and then over time they've coalesced. So some of the older tweets may not be 100% true anymore, but the most of the ideas are still there. I have a lot of dust on my keyboard. It has been a while. Okay. So I came up with 3 different versions of how this Giants versus Dragons game was going to work. Now I say game. This is an RPG. This is D&D basically. No, it's not like a board game or something. What I knew was there used to be an empire of giants and there used to be an empire of dragons, and there were other peoples like humans and elves and dwarves and whatnot that lived in those empires, but the giants and the dragons were the main dudes. And so in this case, ages ago, the giants and dragons warred against each other. The clash of their terrible strength threatened to literally tear the land asunder. Countless on both sides fell and saturated the ground with their blood. To the west, giant blood dominated. To the east, draconic. And in the middle where the two mixed, the land violently seized and cracked and rose as though seeking to escape the commingling antagonistic hemes. I like that word. Thus the wastes were born. I feel sometimes like I should go back and name them the blood wastes. I've just been calling them the wastes because it's shorter. Bottomless crevices bloomed with the heat of exposed lava and bellowed poisonous smoke. Jagged peaks rose violently to pierce the sky and scattered dirt and boulders like rain across the undulating foothills. New creatures born of blood appeared. Those lesser races that settled on the edges absorbed some of their lingering power. They were stronger, faster, taller, smarter, fairer, better. Certain families received the blood more fully than others and came to rule their kin. The upheaval of the wastes revealed a new resource that the giant kin and the dragonborn want. They war against each other to gain control of the bloodstone veins. Probably bloodstone enhances their inheritance, blah, blah, blah. Then there's some secrets that aren't really true or relevant anymore. So yeah, basically there was this war long ago, and almost all of the giants and dragons died. In the current game, there are no more giants or dragons. There are just the giant kin and the dragonborn, those who have inherited their power. And they are few and far between amongst all of the regular, filthy, unwashed masses. And the waste is there. The wastes, like here with the upheaval, I think there's another one that I didn't pull out yet. But what's this one? Oh, okay, here we go. In the aftermath of the Great War, ambitious humans established their own domains on large swaths of the battlefield. These rulers noticed the eminent aura radiating from the land and were soon infused with unimaginable power. They became legends in their own time. They sought to rebuild their numbers, rebuild their kingdoms, and re-wage the war that claimed their forebears. But the power of blood was raw and immense. The mortal frame was not built to house the hearts of elemental power belonging to the giants and dragons. They could not contain and control their growing abilities. They were ultimately warped and destroyed by their hubris and lust for power. They were the first scions, and the lessons of their destruction are passed down to the giant kin and dragonborn to this day. Their followers, who drank less deeply, came to fear the blood-soaked land. As the first scions died and the blood power returned to the battlefield, the land itself heaved and churned. Cities were swallowed, mountains leveled, fields thrust skyward. The wastes were born. Well, more reborn. The survivors fled back toward their ancestral homelands. They settled, grew, and built back their strength. Having borne witness to the destruction of the first scions and the awful birth of the wastes, the first fruits of the Great War, they lost the desire for war. These new kingdoms were born in the ever-present shadow of the wastes. They suffered hard-learned lessons about the reach of the wastes, the twisted monsters that were born from the blood, and the dangers of lingering too long near the blood-soaked lands. The second scions, recognizing the threat posed by the wastes to both sides, reached out to their counterparts to seek a solution. So that means the giants and the dragons cooperated. The details are lost to time, but they were able to seal and refine the blood power at the cost of their own lives. Thus, Bloodstone was born. The source of the turmoil somewhat contained, the wastes retreated to the heart of the ancient battlefield. The borderlands, while still dangerous and traveled by degenerate monsters from the wastes, are open to exploration and reclamation. The third scions have stepped forward to lead, but many have forgotten the lessons learned long ago. With the advent of Bloodstone, some ambitious rulers now seek to control and exploit the same power that destroyed the first and second scions. With the wastes' retreat, more frequent trade is opened up between the two sides. Small settlements have popped up along the safest trade routes, though by no means the shortest or fastest. Outposts near the wastes have also been established to aid in raiding Bloodstone. This is where the campaign starts, the kingdoms expanding into the borderlands and seeking to reclaim Bloodstone from the wastes. Some of this has changed a little bit. But yeah. So I'm going to step back one moment. What was the whole point of this? The wastes was the whole point. I was thinking about trying to come up with another hex crawl idea, but I wanted some twist to it. And what the wastes do, because they move, they churn, they roil, they heave, they literally change over time. So you can't just explore the wastes and map it and then you're done, because the next day or the next week or the next month, it's going to, the land is literally going to move. It's going to fold in on itself. New things are going to pop up. Cracks are going to open. Poisonous swamps are going to appear where there was a glacier last time. And the dungeons, so there used to be things in this battlefield that became the wastes. There were towns, there were cities, there were dungeons, there were castles. And so these things will show up and then disappear as the land moves. And so there's kind of like a time limit on dungeons. It also means that you can use dungeons, any dungeon you want, because it will just show up randomly in the wastes. You don't have to plan out a really you don't have to plan out like the perfect spot for it in your campaign world for everything to make sense. It just kind of pops up. And then there's tons of evil creatures that live in the wastes that can occupy these dungeons and whatnot. And then you go into them and you recover the magical artifacts and gold and other valuables that were left, that were swallowed up by the earth after that first battle and when the wastes were created. The original idea was that the battle itself caused the wastes. That second idea, which we read about the scions, was that the wastes didn't show up immediately. The power of the blood was absorbed very quickly and to a great degree by the first scions, but then when they mutated and died, that power flowed back out into the land, and that's what then caused the wastes. Kind of like an allergic reaction. You have to be sensitized to the allergen, and then when you're re-exposed to the allergen, you have a severe allergic reaction. But I'm not sure that I like that idea completely. What's the next one? Okay, and then we get to this thread. So the actual basic idea of the game. Because I was still wondering, like, is the game going to be the characters journeying into the wastes over and over again? So then how are the wastes actually that dangerous if, like, the initial adventurers are jumping in there? So now I'm kind of having an idea that there's these borderlands. The wastes expanded, and then because of the second scions sealing them, they contracted and exposed the borderlands. The borderlands were not warped like the regular wastes. They're not continually warped like the regular wastes. There have been changes to them compared to old maps. So you can't rely on historical maps or an idea of what used to be over there, decades or centuries ago, because everything may have been shifted around. So they're an unknown land, not quite as dangerous as the wastes themselves. And then the wastes are sort of a high level, more experienced PC area for them to adventure. So here we start as arrivals to a Borderlands town. They're a fair distance from the wastes, but can occupy themselves with nearby ruins. And the occasional monster from the wastes may wander by. So this is also an example of the wastes were so much change that you wanted something to be stable. The Borderlands are stable. They've already had been mixed up, but they're no longer changing. So I was looking into using GURPS Dungeon Fantasy. I spent a long time. There's a huge, this was December, and then this is in March. So there was a lot of stuff in between that I'm skipping here. But I was going through trying to come up with different powers that the various giants and dragon people can have. Should you have a defined lineage where you are literally descended from this particular dragon or this particular giant? Or should it be more of a class of giants, not a particular, legendary frost giant, but just frost giants in general? Or should you just get to pick stuff and mix and match whatever abilities you want as long as they're from the same lineage? You don't get to mix giant and dragon, but any dragon abilities are open for you to have. And again, I say again, I never mentioned this before. This was all without knowing what system I was going to use to run the game. If it was going to be a D&D thing, I'd have to come up with a bunch of powers or find prestige classes in Pathfinder or whatnot that would offer abilities that could model these things. I looked into using Savage Worlds because I have that and I like that, and it's a point-buy system with powers. And then I thought about GURPS Dungeon Fantasy because I bought it and I own it. And so that's what I've ultimately decided to use. So there's, point by character creation. GURPS has tons and tons of powers and abilities that can be seamlessly integrated into the game. Here's a couple blogs where I was looking through. I went through the characters. GURPS is a much more complex system than I remembered it to be, but it's not actually that bad because for the most part, there are some very big, wow, I can't speak tonight. I talk here about if I went with DFRPG, I would want to dial down the lethality of the game. I would hate to force players to make new characters too often. So my original idea was that the wastes were very dangerous. So if you're adventuring in the wastes, it'd be expected to die kind of often. But then I thought, wait a minute. No, the characters are supposed to be better, stronger, faster, smarter. So that actually makes a lot of sense. And what's very interesting is in a normal GURPS game, like the bog standard GURPS RPG game, which is sort of doesn't exist. But the game assumes that you'll start with a 100-point character. Well, Dungeon Fantasy characters are 250 points. They are much better at baseline than a bog standard GURPS character. Dungeon Fantasy is basically remaking a D&D style game in GURPS. GURPS is all point buy. They don't have classes. They don't have races. They just have a suite of abilities and skills and things that you buy with points. But Dungeon Fantasy actually does create a template for the races and create a template for the classes. So it pre-buys a lot of abilities for you. You do still have a selection of points to spend as you want. And that works out so well for this because you can use those extra points, those free points that you have, to either buy additional abilities from your class template, or you can spend them on some of your ancestral powers. And over time in GURPS, you gain character points kind of as your experience. You don't have experience levels, you just gain character points at the end of sessions. And so over time, you can spend those character points to develop more blood powers or increase your character's skills and whatnot. It's very flexible for characters. But that's not to say, even though the lethality is not as high, you can still die pretty dang easy in GURPS. All right, so then we have to find how are you going to explain to people how to play GURPS. So I got that. I found some random dungeon generators. One of them, it generates the names of areas in a dungeon. So I just rolled a couple at random, and I got the Ancient Crypt of Silver Mirrors, the Bloody Tomb of Souls, the Deadly Hall of Stone Hands, the Screaming Cavern of Wisdom, my favorite one. Not that I'm actually using those particular ones, but I may or may not. We'll find out. And then I went into this auto roll tables at github.io, generated a random dungeon description, which was a palace built by a foreign empire in a volcano, reachable only by magic, occupied by a dragon, and spiders holding the artifacts of an elvish hero. Sure, sounds great. Especially because the initial game that I'm starting, you actually are closer to the giant side than the dragon side. And the fact that it's a foreign empire with a dragon inside of it just seems to work out beautifully. I also generated a gigantic castle that was built by an adventurer several decades ago, currently occupied by a retired thief known for bringing ill fortune to those who hold it, and hides the crypt of an ancient sovereign. It also gave me 53 rooms and 108 people. Then I went through DFRPG, and I would just need to bring over some extra powers from the basic set, because one of the other things in Dungeon Fantasy is that they got rid of a ton of abilities that weren't appropriate for bog standard Dungeon Fantasy characters. But obviously we think that they would be great for heritage powers, so I'll just, they already exist. You just pop open the GURPS basic book instead of the Dungeon Fantasy Adventurers book. So then I have an old character named Candlejack and another old character named Wick. And make them the Thief Lord of the Keep. And then the rest of this is just a whole big thing about how Candlejack runs the keep. So there's this keep on the Borderlands, wink, not actually using the module Keep on the Borderlands, but I was reading a play report of someone who was running Keep on the Borderlands, and you can see from my previous thing months before, I was already thinking about characters being in the Borderlands, and that kingdoms were expanding, obviously building keeps to fortify the area. So it's just a natural progression. So yeah, there's this. So Candlejack has taken over the keep from another character who built it, and he is a very mercenary dude. He's a giant-kin swashbuckler. He's a trickster giant. He's very fast. He'll line up to duel his opponent, and before you can even blink, he's already standing behind you, sticking the back of his sword into your back, where he could kill you, but he didn't kill you. He just wanted to prove that he could have killed you. And then there's these things were randomly generated. The fact that the surrounding swamp is filled with blackened bare trees that look burned. And then I added the fact that the castle looked kind of melted, and that there's a main tower with a beacon light, etc., etc. And then there's a dungeon, and I kept the Royal Tomb dungeon idea. And I do actually have a map for the dungeon already, so I just have to actually build it out. But what happens is Candlejack has this keep. He knows that there's this dungeon. Well, they were digging a well and discovered an entrance to this dungeon, and he of course blocked it off, put a very strong door in the way, and has a watch down there 24/7 to make sure that nothing comes up. But in order to draw adventurers to the keep, he allows them to go down for a fee. You got to pay him to go in there, and then when you come back out with treasure, he takes a cut of it because he let you go down in there. And there's actually a slot in the door for you to pass the treasure through before they open it and let you back in. But yeah, he wants strong adventurers, not just regular people, because there's plenty of regular people around, but they suck. What he wants are giants and giantkin and dragonborn to come, because they actually might be able to, adventure and survive down there and bring him some treasure back. And then he can use that treasure to finish building up this keep that he took over, and then expand it into a proper town, and then expand that into a city, and then expand that into a kingdom, and then you'll have King Candlejack, which is something that he would really like. So that's fun. And then, of course, as the players, they have the option of going down into this dungeon several times. And then there are other dungeons in the area around the keep. But because the keep is literally out in the borderlands, leaving the keep itself is very dangerous. If you're not keeping to the roadway that leads back to civilization. So if you're heading out into the wilderness, you better have been a bit stronger. So the intention is the players will delve down into the dungeon under the keep. That dungeon will be big enough that they can do that a lot if they want to, or after a certain amount of time, if they get bored with the dungeon delving in the keep, they can go explore around around Candlekeep, which is what it's called, and find other dungeons to delve into or other adventures to have. I'm not going to do too much more of this because we're already 20 minutes in, but basically, we'll go to that one last, right? Oh, no. Yeah, we got 2 of these. So, pinned on if you go to my Twitter, it's my pinned tweet is these non-encounter hex location ideas. I was posting these. I was trying to post at least one a day for a while. It's been because I've been working on the Giants versus Dragons game and then this last one, the Gargoyle Pit, recently. I haven't been doing these. But this is a pretty long thread of just random locations or geological features or something, but none of them are encounter based. They're just weird or interesting things. And it started, you might remember, they found that strange triangular metal monolith embedded in the stone in Colorado. So yeah, that's it. There you go. The monolith may do something special. Who knows? There's the spook light, which is a mysterious light that's visible in the distance, but only from one direction. And as you start walking towards it, it walks away. It gets further from you. A giant hill that is a magnet. That's it. The hill is a magnet. Get too close and you might have your metal stuff pulled away. The Shaman's Portal. A traveler who strays too far from his companions among the hills can disappear in a flash of green light. That was from some urban legend thing that I read. Coral Castle. There's a beach where every day as the tide rolls out, thousands of crabs come out of the water and put coral, shells, driftwood, and flotsam and build up a castle. An eternal flame. This is a real thing. Like multiple places have this. There's a natural gas leak inside of a cave, and somebody just lights it on fire, and it basically stays on fire for a long, long time. Although in this game, maybe it's magical. The Vortex Forest. Everything in the area is twisted. It's all just twisted. Why is it twisted? I don't know. Part of the fun of these things, these encounter and hex ideas, is just they're interesting locations. There's not enough detail. It's not completely spelled out. You can add an encounter to any of these if you wanted it to have some kind of fight or not or whatnot in it. Otherwise, it's just something weird, and you can totally use it as a springboard to find out why is it like that? What happened? That everything in the Vortex Forest is all twisted. The trees are growing in big corkscrews. The land itself is all corkscrewed. This sun shower, glowing cloud coalesces overhead and begins raining droplets of golden light. This happened because it was raining on me and the sun was behind. There was one rain cloud in the sky and the sun was behind it and it was raining, but it was sunny all around it and it looked like it was kind of glowing. It was fun. Here's the burnt wood. I mentioned the burnt wood in the Candlejack thread, which was legitimately randomly generated by that generator. But I had come up with the idea of the burnt wood. Thin, leafless, carbon black trees that look like burnt, soot-covered remains of a wildfire. So who knows? So there's a whole bunch of those. Like I said, it goes on for a while. I have some pictures for some of them. And I like it. It's good. I'll probably do a separate video for the Gargoyle Pit, since it's its own thing that I'm working on right now, and it's taken my attention away from Giants versus Dragons. But the intention is for that to actually be part of the Giants versus Dragons dungeon somewhere, so it's not wasted work. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of an update. If you want, as I mentioned, you can come to the Twitter and read all of this information. It's there free for anybody. And I will see you later. Bye-bye.